Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is not Eugenio, my name is Marco Cremonini. Eugenio was not able to reach us today, and so I will give you this presentation about, this is a completely different topic. Again, we are talking about environment, about pollution, about risk, but on a completely different scenario. The time here is different. These are things that are happening slowly in the past and you want to manage now and to solve. It's not something that you are expecting, something that in many, many occasions already happened you want to solve. Next. Okay, this morning we already had an introductory talk about the situation, but this is giving basically also the history how these things came in Europe, came in Italy, and so what is the strong experience that we developed. And is this a problem? No. Okay. Basically, everything started in the States, and in 1980s, you know, the Environmental Protection Agency decided to start a big program for the restoration and defined the rules of the games in this super fund project. Next. Thanks. And after a few years, the same approach came to Italy, to Europe. And as you know, the European Union is providing directives, which means that these are regulations that are providing guidelines for the member states to be adopted and implemented and particularized to the single situation of the nation. So in 2004 came out. So we can say that in Europe, this is the starting. And so in 2004, we can say that in Europe there was a common framework. Then each state had to adopt its own regulation, but this was the common framework. The rules of the game were defined. Okay, next. No, back. Sorry, I didn't see that you changed. Okay, so basically, Italy is a particular situation where our territory is very small, and there are, as you saw in the map that my colleague Giovanni showed before, we have concentration of industries in different places. And you remember that map of Italy with all of the dots. And each one of them is potentially a source of pollution for soils and groundwater. And so instead, while you know, the European Union was still thinking about to adopt this framework directive, we already started in 1989 with some kind of compilation of regional plans. So these were inventories done for the local authorities to detect on their territory, each region, the 20 regions that we have, was doing kind of investigation and assessing and identifying the possible polluting situation. And we got the first experience there because we developed for 3 regions this kind of inventories. Then in 1999, there was a decree which was defining exactly what was a contaminated site and how to solve. The problem with this regulation was that the problems were clearly identified, but everything was based on a table of values which are defined for each parameter, chemical parameter, a threshold. If you were above, you were contaminated. If you were below, you were not contaminated. And this table was standard, so was applicable to all kinds of sites throughout our nation. This means that these values were established quite high in order to be sure to be comprehensive of all possible scenarios. And so at the end, you were coming out with a situation where, you know, many sites were polluted, and you were, if they were detected as polluted, you had to undergo remediation actions with the associated cost. So immediately after a couple of years application, in 2001, we understood that it was needed a more flexible approach, mainly based on risk-based. So calculating the risk of this specific area and then adopting the countermeasures that were specific for your site. Next. And so we came to some intermediate regulatory acts, and then to the 2006 decree, which is fixing the rules according to the framework. And so we have a risk-based identification of contaminated sites on the basis of the source pathway reception approach, so similar to what we are doing in the industries. Next. Key principles, which are very important. And it looks like I didn't understood well this morning, but probably you have a similar approach here, where you define as potentially contaminated a site where at least one parameter is above a specific limit value. So you say you are below, you are not contaminated, but if one of them is above, you say this is potentially contaminated. Then you have to investigate, to know more about your site, and you do a risk analysis. So you identify target for the acceptable concentration for the contamination, which is specific for your site. And then you decide. If you are below those level, then you don't have to do anything. You can say that it was potentially contaminated, but it is not actually contaminated. You just keep doing some monitoring. If you are above, then you have to adopt measures that can reduce concentration below these limits. And this is what explained there down. Next. And so this is, at the end, it comes out with a kind of complex scheme. This is reproducing what I just said with words. One thing is important to know is this bottleneck evaluation, which means best available technologies entailing not excessive cost. This means that now the parameter of the cost of remediation comes into our story. It is very important because what happened in our country is that when we started just in 1989, then basically the process was stuck because the regions were identifying sites that were needing remediation, but there was no money, not enough money to make this. Also, there was a problem to identify, as we'll see later on, the liability associated with this, who was responsible for this pollution. And so in this case, it was very complex. And so the idea is to find solutions which, according to the risk analysis, can be applied without having excessive cost. And so the risk analysis always is a tool that allows us, and we'll see some examples later on, allows us to reduce, to limit the use of the money to the things that are actually needed. Next. Now, liability principle, responsibility for contamination. This is very important to define since the beginning. Our law is defining that who polluted is responsible. And so he has to clean. Then there is another article that says if you cannot identify immediately who was responsible, then the public authority is acting on behalf of this unknown responsible, is doing the remediation, and then he will pursue later on when he'll find who was the responsible for recovering the cost incurred. Okay, and there is specified the two things. These are action and omissions. So it means that you can cause pollution, for instance, being an owner of the industrial plant, doing something which is against the law, maybe releasing some polluting substance against the law, maybe in a river, on a ditch, or on the soil. Or maybe you can do for omission. So you are not doing your management of your plant according to the main, to the rules, and then you can cause pollution, and then you have to remediate. Next. Okay, this I don't want to enter in detail, so probably you cannot see very easily from there the small characters. But this gives you the complex process, and also this could be interesting, and we could work on that. The two situations, you have to define your procedure, so several steps that follows from when you discover your site, then when you decide that it has been remediated, and all of the official steps that you have to follow in terms of notification, supervision, and so on. So the act that a regulatory agency like you are, should do in order to supervise and push the process of site remediation. Next. Okay. Just to give you an idea how is the organization for this, and this is similar also in other countries in Europe. Basically, you have regions, and so you have Italy, regions, and in each region you have provinces and municipalities. Next. And you see the different responsibilities. So at the top you have the Minister of Environment, which is giving the rule of the game, is also defining what could be the financial resources eventually available in order to clean up a situation where very big emergencies, and then so to anticipate what the private are not doing. And then you have the regional authorities, which are basically supervising and also trying to identify within the territory all of the possible bad situation. Then you have the regional authorities. Regional authorities are basically doing the supervision. So they are checking, they are coming during remediation to take samples and to make approval. And the municipality, they have a similar but more local role in the process, because they're approving finally the design, but also they're approving also what is very important, the conversion of the land to a different use, because this is at the end is what is triggering, is pushing the process. You can clean up an area, so anticipating the money, spending money, but then the value of the land will be much higher, because maybe before was an industrial area, at the end it will be sold to build houses or things like that, and so you can recover this cost from the difference. So the process of changing the land use destination is very important. It's in process. Next. Okay. This also, we have kind of regional environmental protection agency which are cooperating with the province in order to provide technical support for this supervision. They have labs, there are people going on site taking samples and so on. Next. So a few concluding remarks of this regulatory introduction. We saw that this contaminated site management, in our experience, is a very complex process. Also because it involves a number of different subjects, so you have many people involved, and you have this notification, disclosure, and so on. So it's a technical problem, and on the same time is a kind of documental, is a certification, notification, authorizational process. And our approach, we think that is a valid example of how sustainably you can approach the problem of contaminated sites. And a few key issues. Next is to apply correctly the liability principle. So it's very important to identify since the beginning who was responsible for the contamination, and so who is going to be in charge of the environmental damages. And the second issue that I raised was the high costs. Sometimes the operations of remediation of huge sites are stopping because everybody's scared about the possible consequence in terms of amount of money that is needed to complete the remediation. And there is a need of high competence and skills. And we'll see later on in a few examples of actual case studies that this was the case, that you need skills, and competence in both on the authorities side and on the operators, because they have to cooperate and to solve. It's not like to pick up a handbook from a shelf, looking at the solution and then say, okay, you have to do this, and that's done. Contaminated site remediation needs a lot of insight, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge in order to find solutions which are every time specific of the site, So you have a framework specific of the site, and they're trying to reach the maximum results with the minimum amount of money. Another issue is that you have to organize in an adequate way the approval and inspection processes if you want to manage. And I think this is one of the possible roles, and this is also a field in which we could provide some experience on that in order to support your process. And basically working out procedures and working instructions, guidelines and so on, which could be standard and could be distributed also to all of your territory in order to have an uniform approach to contaminated site remediation. And one other thing is a complex process, but also you must use an adaptive approach, which means that as the time is passing, as we did in Europe, in Italy, starting for the superfund approach, which was very rigorous, approach, regulation, methodologies were improved, and so they were adapting to the new results, new technologies available, new knowledge about the actual risk for health and for environment. The parameters that were used in, let's say, the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, were much higher. This doesn't mean that now, we have a different, a more risky situation. It's because now we know more about the actual risk associated to the dispersion in the environment, in the soil, in the groundwater, a specific substance. Okay, I think this is the end. Okay, thank you very much.